Well, that's a perfect segue to what you're doing now, which is you've announced that you're trying to start a go-karting business. So what's kind of your, and it sounds like it's a real passion project for you. So how did you what's been your interest? Has it just been casual? Have you been one of those guys that did on the weekends, like actual racing, or like what's your relationship with go-karting?
Did you catch that bit where I said I was broke? Yeah, I didn't do any actual racing. You don't do that when you're broke.
Okay. True. It's a good point. It's a good point.
I've always been passionate, and like a lot of people, a lot of kids grow up and you watch your parents driving, and you want to drive and you want to learn how to do it, and so I grew up at that level. But I actually have memories of Mum had a neck chain that was just a simple chain, a fairly fine sort of a gauge. And I used to hassle her to take it off and let me play with it. And what I would do is I would close the loop, latch it onto itself, and I would scrunch it up in my hand and I would drop it on the floor. And I would see it hit the floor, and then whatever shape it made, whatever little squigglies it made, I would imagine that was a racetrack. And I would imagine what would that be like if you were driving around in this direction. You had the left-hand corner and then the right-hand corner, and then I'll just straighten this bit out here and I'll make that bit a bit sharp. And I would kind of design racetracks out of a neck chain that had been just randomly dropped on the floor. And then once I'd had my fun in one direction, I'd think, well, what's this same track going to be like driving the other way if we drove around that way? And it became the opposite one. So I would have to say that as much as lots of kids have an interest in cars and an interest in racing, there was something about it that grabbed me a little bit more, even from an early age, as I think back into sort of early memories. I can remember going go-karting for the first time. It scared the shit out of me. Absolutely terrified me. I was a young teenager at the time, and other people are just flying past me, and I'm in this thing that's vibrating violently, and the steering was really heavy and hard to do at the age that I was, but I loved it, and all I wanted to do was do it again. And I never really got to. My parents were very, very, very. I hesitate to use the word poor, but because I don't think anyone in Australia actually ever is. They had no spare money, and the thought of spending money to go go-karting was impossible. So I very rarely got to do it until I started to get my own income, which, like I said, was when I was 13. But I still wasn't allowed to drive to go anywhere and actually go-karting. So it was sort of when I was 16, 17 and friends had licenses and I had a little bit of money and I could go go-karting and a couple of times a year. Like, we're still not talking very often. And that was a passion that I kind of carried with me through to adulthood. And in as recently as the last few years, I was organising groups for friends of mine to come and kind of do our own championship. So we would go to all the different outdoor go-karting places around Melbourne, and we would race, and we'd keep a tally of who won and who came second, and we'd assign points to them. And then we'd go and race at 4 or 5 different places. And then, okay, the season is over, the year is over. We have a champion who got the most points over the season, and blah, blah, blah. And I got really fed up. I got really frustrated because there's a lot of things wrong with go-karting as it exists today. And this, I guess, is the entrepreneurial story where you find yourself sitting there going, there has to be a better way. This can't be as good as this gets. And one of my key frustrations was that there were just so few tracks to race. And I started wondering, why can't the same place have multiple tracks? Well, there's an obvious reason why they can't. That way they need more land, they need more infrastructure, the costs go up, their overheads go up, and it's not economically viable. So I began to think more deeply through that problem, and I decided to just have a go at designing a reconfigurable track. And this is a bit of a scoop for you and for your listeners at the moment, because the marketing for my new company has begun, but we're actually keeping everything under wraps. All of the stuff that makes us special, we're keeping under wraps at the moment with one or two small exceptions. And it's not going to be until sort of March next year, because we're not opening till hopefully November of 2018, all going well. We're going to do a drip campaign where we release more and more information about ourselves. But you have the scoop. We have a reconfigurable track. And I'm not going to say how many different racetracks we can make. But what I will tell you is this. It is a huge number. In the context of most places either having one track or two tracks where they drive this way or they drive that way, our number is huge.
Yeah.
And no two of those tracks have more than 50% in common with any other track. So I'm not talking about tracks that are almost the same, but there's like one little squiggly bit that's extra. I'm not talking about anything silly like that. These are substantially different racetracks from each other. And so what we're able to do, instead of people having to drive around to different places to go-karting and to run a championship and to get a new challenge, they can sign up and become a member with us and just keep coming back. You come back once a month for 12 months. You'll race on a different track every single time. At the end of the year, we'll give out trophies and we'll have a big party and there'll be a championship. We'll take all the winners from all the different championships and let you have your own championship, a Champions League, where we narrow it down to just a single driver who's the best driver in the entire place. What this does, not only does it solve the frustration that I had as an enthusiast, as a driver, but it transforms the business model and turns go-karting from the special event, the special occasion. You go-karting for your mate's birthday, for the Bucks party, for the end-of-year function at work. That's why you go-karting right now. But you'll go and play tennis every week or cricket every week, or you'll do training for footy on a Wednesday, and then you go and play a game on a Sunday. You'll do that twice a week. And over the course of a year, you spend a fortune playing golf and doing all these other things on a regular basis. Well, now go-karting actually becomes a viable sporting alternative. You can sign up to a championship and come back, be it every week, every month, whatever, depending on the championship that you sign up to, and race for 10 minutes or an hour or up to 24 hours. There's another scoop for you.
Cool.
In motorsport. But instead of having the overheads of having to buy your own cart, stick it on a trailer, drive it all over the country, blah, 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 you just get in the car after work, drive down to us at the scheduled time, we hand you a fully prepared cart, and away you go. And you race. And so it transforms the business model. Instead of needing to attract events and parties and Bucks parties and corporate groups, we need to attract enthusiasts. And we don't need very many of them. And I promise you there are plenty in Melbourne. There are plenty in Melbourne.
Yep.
So it was just this beautiful picture that emerged as I worked through this, and I never expected to find such a good way of doing a reconfigurable track. And
is this like a technology that you've designed,
correct.
Or did you discover it? Like, what was? Yeah.
So okay. I sat there with a blank piece of paper and this idea in my head that I wanted to be able to keep going back to the same place and have a new track lots and lots of times. I didn't have a target number, but I thought at least 6 would be nice. I exceeded that number by multiples.
Yep.
What I sat there with when it all kind of I had it in my head and I was like, this should work, and then I tried to draw it and it didn't work, and it was that classic, I didn't literally scrunch up the pieces of paper and throw them in the corner. But if they ever make a movie of if they ever make a movie of my life, which they won't because it would be boring, that's how they will represent that scene. I'll be ripping off pages and throwing them, scrunching up, throwing them in the corner. But eventually, I had a moment where it kind of all joined up in the right way. And as I think about it, I was back to playing with that neck chain that my mum had. I was kind of back to just looking at this thing and going, no, I can make this better. I can make this work. I know that in theory this works. I've just got to find the practical way of doing it. Once I hit that, and I had this crude little sketch in front of me on a piece of paper in a notebook, and I went, that's it. That does what I needed to do. I kind of went a little bit crazy. I don't know if you heard, and I don't know how many of your viewers will have heard the talk that I did as part of the homeschooling panel at the most recent Friedman conference. But I talked a little bit about how different opportunities had come up to different sort of business opportunities had come up. And I talked about how I ended up organising a tradesman to replace a collapsed factory roof over the Easter weekend with a week and a half's notice because my mate called me up who did maintenance and said, I don't want this job. Can you find someone to do it? And so I just kind of kicked into homeschool, figure it out mode. There's no rules, just find a way. And I did. And I kind of kicked into that mode. I went, right, now what? I've got an idea that if this was ever made would be exactly the place that I would want to go driving all of the time. I want this place to get made. The only way this place is going to get made is if I make it or organize for someone else to make it or present it to someone so they make it or somehow get it off the page and into reality, and it's on me. I'm the only one who can, because I'm the one sitting here with this thing in front of me. I did research online. There's over 2,500 go-karting places around the world. Not a single one of them has anything close to this track design. This track design is so unique that my now business partner looked at it and said, we need to get a patent on this. And intellectual property is another thing that we can discuss, because I'm actually not a fan of it. But if it's going to get used against me, if it's going to exist, I'm going to use it as a tool as well.
That's it. Yeah.
And so we're still just refining the wording. We've got a fairly high caliber patent attorney writing up a patent on this now. That's how unique it is. It is unlike anything anywhere in the world in terms of what it does, how it achieves it, and just how good it actually is at giving you a huge number of very different tracks that you can drive on. So I then went, well, if this is ever going to get made, I need to convince someone to make it. And that means I need to build a business plan that shows them it's a really good idea. So this is about 2.5 years ago that I was sitting there with that sketch in front of me. And I went, well, okay, there goes all of my weekends and all of my evenings and all of my spare time until it's done, until I have this business plan. And I built a business plan. It stretched out to over 100 pages at one point, and I kind of culled things out of it and brought things down. I spent weekends sitting in my car out the front of my future competitors, counting the cars as they drove past me into their car park and marking off how many people were in the car, and then keeping track of how long they stayed in the car park and how many times different groups were down on track. And I started to build a bit of a revenue model and started to figure out how much money my competitors were making. I did some stuff. There's someone that I know who does stuff online who got me some information that told me how many people were on my competitors' websites and what some of their behavior was, and a whole bunch of stuff like that. And I was able to build a pretty clear picture of the industry in Victoria. And we had a really unique situation where we haven't had a new outdoor go-karting track built in 14 odd years. And even that one was a replacement to one that shut down. So we actually haven't had a new one in the sense of an increase in the number of outdoor go-karting tracks in 20 years. But the population has been doing this. And car culture is a pretty big part of the city. There's a lot of sort of petrol heads here. And so it was just the right place at the right time. And I got all the research, I put it all together, I did my financial modeling, I costed it out, I figured out it was going to cost in excess of $3 million to build this place. And then I went, okay, now I have to find someone who's got $3 million who's going to pay for me to build it. And about 15 months and lots of unsuccessful pitches later, I found him. And now it's happening.
This is obviously like something quite different, something quite new. Libertarians talk a lot about the regulatory environment. Obviously, I'm guessing, you're still probably working through some of that since you're not open yet. What's been the process like that? Because, we talk about regulation in this kind of abstract sense, but, in reality, there's like lots of like really technical individual things. And I suspect for something like a go-kart track, which has got safety issues, you're dealing with customers, you're dealing with people who aren't trained, so there's going to be a lot of kind of stuff around that. What's been the process of sort of working through the regulatory side of things?
Look, a bit of a mixed bag. From a safety point of view, I'm actually pretty happy with the way the industry runs. It has a more or less voluntary code of conduct that I think is actually a bit minimal. And we are actually just making a business choice to far exceed the standards that are in that the regulations, as they're called, but not really. No one enforces them, and I can tell you there's lots of places that don't adhere to them. There are some really, really dangerous outdoor go-karting places in Melbourne, and I can show you some videos that are hair-raising. Collisions happening of a stationary cart being hit by a cart moving at 60 plus kilometres an hour. I can show you a video of a cart that loses its front wheel mid-corner. The wheel physically came off the cart, and the guy speared off the corner and ended up slamming into a wall. It was protected by a single layer of tyres. According to the regulations, the tyres should have been a decent distance away from the wall so the tyres can move and absorb the impact before you reach the wall. They weren't. They were right up against the wall. And so he didn't hit the wall at full speed, but he hit a concrete factory wall at, I'm going to say, 45 odd kilometers an hour in a go-kart that had just become a tricycle. Okay. So some terrifying stuff. So those are places that don't even live up to the code of conduct as it exists. I looked at the code of conduct and went, well, actually, I can see a lot of ways to far exceed that, and I think it's in my interests to do that. So that's what we're doing, and our go-kart track will actually arguably be possibly the safest in the world. I can say with a fair degree of confidence, with the amount of technology that is going into this track, it'll be the safest in Australia. And so, for example, and here's another scoop for your listeners, when you run off the track, the system will automatically slow you down. So it will not actually be possible to drive off the track and have a head-on with a barrier at full speed, even if you try.
So your track is going to be like outdoors, as in completely outdoors, like a real
racetrack,
that sort of thing, rather than being instead of like inside a boxing kind of factory thing.
It's real racing. We have up to 1 kilometre in length. So different configurations have different lengths. We have up to 1 kilometre, which is the longest track in Victoria. And we have what will be easily the safest track in Victoria. So from my point of view, this industry doesn't have a problem with regulation in that sense. However, let me tell you a little bit about the suffering of the landowner of where we're going to be. So go-karting is not a high-value land use. I can't compete in the open market against someone who wants to start up a logistics company or a trucking company. Even manufacturing in Australia can still afford to pay more for warehouse space than I can afford to pay as a go-kart operator if I'm going to do a big centre. And that's why we find all these indoor centres that are really cramped and really small and frankly, they don't feel like real racing at all. And that's because they're paying a premium for every square foot and go-karting just doesn't generate the kind of revenue that other people can generate and therefore can afford to pay more. So we were looking for some low-value land, and there's a long story in all of this, but the short version is we ended up securing some land that is outdoors in a fairly built-up area, but this particular piece of land has never been built on because it's underneath where high-tension power lines go.
Right.
Now, there's a little bit of a story just in that, because in other countries, and I was just talking to another chap in the same industry in Holland yesterday, one of my suppliers, he talked about the fact that he was surprised that we don't build under power lines. He's like, I'm surprised you can waste all of this space. Like in Holland, we just build everything. Like there's factories, there's everything going on. Yeah. It's all there. It's under the power lines. Deal with it. But we have enough space that we can carve out these huge reserves and dead space on both sides and everything else. For the landowner, he was being paid a relatively nominal rental fee in compensation for the power lines going over his land. He doesn't have a pylon in his land. They just go over his land. So he now all of a sudden couldn't do with this land what he would otherwise have been able to do were the power lines not there. And he didn't have a choice in the matter. And he wasn't being paid very much in return for that. To compound his problems, when he then did start researching what he could do with this land, because the land has the portion that's under the power lines, but then there's also a portion that's not. So he was researching, I want to build some factories over here, not under the power lines. They did an environmental survey and discovered that there is something called a dwarf galaxious fish living, I kid you not, in some discarded tyres that were lying in a ditch that has water in it. And the dwarf galaxious fish is listed as an endangered species. So all of a sudden now,
I feel like this is like the beginning of some sort of libertarian joke about regulation. Like,
I tell you what,
keep going,
this guy wishes it was a joke. So he then is required to spend about $250,000 building some lakes under these power lines in a place where lakes have never existed before, so that these dwarf galaxious fish have somewhere to live when he fills in the tire-filled ditch that was also not natural. It was a man-made ditch to build the factories on the other part of the land. And he's not allowed to do anything with any of his land until that pond is built.
Holy moly, that's something else.
So he was very happy when we came along and said, hey, actually, that other part of the land that isn't where the lake is going to be, but is underneath the power lines, that's really interesting to us, and we can actually do something useful with that, and we can pay you closer to a commercial rate for that land, and we can coexist along with the power lines above. And he was like, yes, thank you, welcome, come on in. And so a really favourable deal, a genuine win-win was struck. But it was only a win-win because of the amount of value that was taken off him by others on his land. His win is that he's getting back a portion of the value that was taken. He's not ahead. He's just not. He's just not as far behind as what he was before.
Okay.
I read something absurd. No, I don't remember where, but something about someone was suggesting that landowners should have to pay the council out of the increase in value that they receive when land zoning is changed. So if we rezone your land from X to Y, and therefore it's now worth a whole lot more money, you owe us, the council, a whole lot of money because we just gave you all of that value for free. And this author, I don't remember who it was saying, the councils are giving away trillions of dollars a year for free. They're just giving this money away.
Oh, my goodness.
And I nearly exploded because it is obvious to anyone with a scrap of just a tiny bit of critical thinking that at best, all they are doing is giving back the value that was stolen when they placed the restriction on there in the first place. That's at best, that's the most charitable way to look at it. There's a lot of more cynical ways that you could look at it. But the most charitable way to look at it is that they are giving back a very small slice of the value that was stolen in the first place. So I have a real issue, and this is the libertarian in me coming out, with sort of centrally planned, town planning, these sorts of things. However, I'm running into this really weird situation. For the last sort of 7 years, I've kind of been able to run my mouth off because I haven't had a lot to lose. I make a video about, politicians lying, and I directly called out by name Tim Holding and John Brumby and called them liars on a video. Didn't have a lot to lose.
Yeah.
Now, all of a sudden, if I'm going to be the managing director of a company that has assets and has sunk a whole lot of money and is, blah, 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 I'm finding myself in this really weird place where I'm having to start to go, can I still be that outspoken person? Can I simultaneously run a blog and make videos and create this business? And the conclusion that I've come to, and anyone who's been following me on my blog on my Facebook page will know this, the conclusion that I've come to is that I need to go quiet for a little while at the very least. Get this thing set up, get it so that it's running, get it so that I can distance myself from it, and then I can go shouting from the rooftops again and go back to making enemies and all that sort of stuff that I have fun doing. But right at this particular moment in my life, I need to prioritize getting along with some of these people.
Sure. If you started calling the local council a bunch of names, I suspect they're going to be less impressed with you when you say, "Hey, I want a permit." Right. By the way,
well, here's the interesting thing. This particular council, and we're not actually announcing exactly where it is yet, but this particular council have genuinely been fantastic, and I say that knowing they'll never see this video. They have genuinely been fantastic, really communicative, really helpful. And really trying to smooth out the process. And this is consistent. This isn't just us. This council has a really good reputation. But I reflect even on that. And all that essentially means is that this council is better at getting out of the way than the others are.
Exactly. Yeah.
A really efficient bureaucrat is just someone who takes less time to waste yours. Like that's all it ultimately is. And I have to stop talking now because otherwise I'm going to make enemies where I don't want to have them. For the time being.
No, I mean it's a good observation. I mean, Adam Smith said, the way to reach the heights of wealth in a country is, low taxes and the tolerable administration of justice. Yeah. So, it's really it's an observation that's not new. Yeah. That's 1799. So it's No, and it's also interesting you bring up the whole speech side of things because this is a regulatory issue, not just for your industry, but every industry. If you are running Qantas, obviously Alison Joyce is pretty outspoken on some issues, but if you wanted to get up and jump up and down about aircraft regulation, well, you got to deal with the regulators who have the ability to say, well, we're going to start doing extra inspections this time around. There's all sorts of elements where speech interacts with regulation to create this situation where people aren't free to speak their minds, which to a level, obviously, when we see the corporate speech side of things, or like, individuals working for bigger companies, how free am I to go on Twitter and say what I like? Well, there's a little bit of, you've just got to play nice with other people. But when it comes to regulators, it's a bit of a different thing. So, yeah.
And to be put in a situation where a given regulation or a given regulatory body is costing you a fortune, and in the case of many companies around Australia currently and in recent past, and I'm sure there'll be plenty more in future, they're actually being destroyed by regulation. But if they speak up and protest against the thing that is destroying them, the destruction will only get faster or worse. And you kind of think, well, if you can't even safely speak up against the thing that's killing your business or may kill your business, that says some really bad things about where we're at as an economy and as a political sort of that, as exactly as you say, kind of that nexus between your freedoms and economic reality. Is sure, play nice. I only call people liars when they deserve it, for example,
Sure. Yeah.
And when I can actually prove that they stood up in court and is recorded in Hansard that they said something that they must have known at that point in time was not true. That's, I pick my moments to not play nice.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if your business is being destroyed by a regulatory body, why should you have to play nice? Why can't the gloves come off? And yet they have so much power, and they can do so much damage by, your example is a perfect one, increasing the number of inspections. Oh, I'm sorry, we found a little issue over here. You're going to have to stop operating until that's been resolved and fixed. And, a day and a half of shutdown, most businesses can't afford that if they're already on the brink, and da-da-da-da. The unions use the same tactics. We see this. I mean, it's bullying. It's all it is. It's bullying. It's, we are in a position of power, or we want to be in a position of power, and so we are going to throw all the toys out of the cot and keep on screaming until we get what we want. And we see regulators doing that. We see unions doing that. And to be honest, we don't see enough of businesses pushing back, in my opinion.
Sure.
But then again, I can kind of understand why now that I'm heading closer to being in their shoes. It's kind of like, I might need to just be a little bit selective about what I
circumspect. Yeah. Well, we could probably keep talking, but I'm sure we've both got things to do. I have to say that you think your life is not interesting enough for a movie, but I think your life is more than interesting enough for a movie. And when you're the go-karting king of the world, I guess we'll have to organize somebody to video to do a version of your life, because I think there's a whole bunch of things that people could, learn from your life and your experiences.
Look, I think that's very kind. If you ever want to do a listeners go-karting day, where you come across to Melbourne, invite your listeners to come from all over Australia, come down and come go-karting. We'd love to have you.
I think that sounds great. I think that sounds really good. So thank you very much for joining me. I wish you the best of luck, and I will definitely come next time in Melbourne when the course is open. I'll definitely have to come by and give it a go, because it sounds like you're doing something really interesting and different. And thanks for your contribution as well with all your videos, and hopefully you can get back to that sometime soon.
Look, it's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me, and I just hope that those who have watched have found it worthwhile.
Yeah, excellent. All right. Well, thank you, listeners and viewers. I think, make sure if you want to find out more details, what's the website, by the way, for your new go-karting
so the
place?
name of the company is Drive Go-Karting, so drivegokarting.com. Or just search for Drive Go-Karting on Facebook. We do have a competition at the moment. You can win a $5,000 go-karting package, which means that you and 35 of your friends can go go-karting for an hour solid and have the most ridiculous go-karting party you can possibly imagine. So enter that competition. You might win. And, of course, once we're open late 2018, we'll be plastering that all over the Facebook page and the website and all that sort of thing.
That's it. And I'll make sure I'll whack Topher's YouTube channel in the description. So if you want to check out his videos, you can still do so. Thanks for joining me. And